I married her against my will to save my parents' reputation, but what about my happiness? The moment I looked into the eyes of the woman I was about to marry, I knew I was signing the death warrant for the only life I ever wanted. I'm Julian, 32, and the gold wedding band on my finger isn't a symbol of love, it's a shackle forged in scandal, a heavy chain I willingly accepted to save my parents from ruin. Years later, looking at the pristine, empty life I inhabit, I have to ask myself, did I save the family name only to lose the meaning of my own existence? Before the darkness consumed us, I was secretly planning an escape. I was the eldest son, the heir apparent to the Vance family legacy, a formidable, old money finance empire built on generations of ruthless integrity. My life was charted. Corporate law, then finance, then taking the helm. I excelled at it all. I wore the suits, I mastered the market, and I perfected the polite, detached smile expected of me. But my true life existed in the hours between midnight and dawn, in a tiny rented studio across town. I wasn't a financier, I was an abstract painter. My passion was raw, chaotic, and completely unacceptable to my parents, especially my father, Arthur Vance, 65, whose life was reputation. My paintings were vibrant, messy explosions of color that contradicted the gray, orderly life of the Vance name. I had been saving money, quietly planning to walk away at 30, to shed the suit and trade the boardroom for the studio, regardless of the fallout. And there was Elara. She was 31, an architect who understood light and structure, but who saw the chaos beneath my polished exterior. She was the one who encouraged the artist in me, who would visit my secret studio, looking at my unfinished canvases not with judgment, but with fierce pride. We had mapped out our future, a small, chaotic loft downtown, shared independence, and a life where passion came before profit. The apartment lease was 2 weeks away from being signed. Then the world exploded. It started with a nervous call from my mother, Eleanor, 62, a woman whose entire existence was tied to the social calendar and the family's impeccable standing. She didn't cry. She spoke in brittle, terrified whispers. My father, the man who preached ironclad integrity, had made a catastrophic error. It wasn't simple poor management. It was a devastating ethical compromise, a risky investment that crossed legal lines and collapsed, leaving a colossal financial crater and, far worse, a moral stain. The market was already reacting. Regulators were circling. If the truth came out, not only would the Vance empire crumble, but my father faced criminal charges and our entire family name would be ruined, relegated to financial and social pariah status. I rushed to the family office. My father, usually a figure of granite authority, looked defeated, utterly gray. He didn't ask for my help. He issued a desperate, final command. The solution, he explained, had already been arranged by his legal team. It was a strategic, emergency merger with the Thorne family, another powerful, old-guard family whose fortune was tied to manufacturing, not finance. The Thornes possessed the capital and the political insulation my father desperately needed. But the alliance had a price, a condition set by Mr. Thorne, the patriarch, a cold, calculating man who valued lineage over cash. The merger had to be sealed through marriage. The bride was Isabelle Thorne, 30, the Thornes' only daughter. My father looked at me, not with paternal love, but with the cold, desperate demand of a commander asking a soldier to fall on a grenade. He told me that this was the only way to stabilize the firms, silence the regulators, and save the family's name, reputation, and freedom. He didn't mention my happiness. He didn't even acknowledge that he was asking me to throw my life away. He simply said, Julian, you are the heir. This is your duty. The weight of the Vance name, the generations of status, the entire, suffocating legacy descended upon me. The choice wasn't about me versus Isabelle, it was about me versus my parents' complete ruin. If I refused, my father went to jail, my mother lost everything, and the name that defined my entire existence would become synonymous with scandal and failure. My mind screamed of Elara, of the signed lease, of the canvases waiting for my hand. My heart pounded with the fierce, wild yearning for the freedom I was so close to grasping. But the sound of my mother's brittle, tearless panic echoed louder. I realized that my own life was expendable in the face of the Vance reputation. I looked at my father, seeing not a powerful financier, but a terrified old man facing ruin. I nodded. I accepted the terms. The next call I made was to Elara. I didn't meet her in the secret studio. I met her in a neutral, public park, surrounded by the ordinary noise of children playing in distant traffic. I couldn't bear to pollute our sanctuary with this betrayal. I told her, simply and without embellishment, that I couldn't sign the lease, that my family was in crisis, and that I was getting married. The look on her face was not anger, it was a profound, chilling disbelief, followed by a quiet, absolute devastation. She didn't argue, she didn't scream, she just looked through me, seeing the man who had promised her chaos and beauty morph into the suit and tie he always feared becoming. She didn't need me to explain the details. She understood the power of the name I carried. She stood up, her eyes empty, and walked away from me, from our future, from the man she loved and respected. What would you do? Explain the crushing financial ruin and shame to the woman you love, begging for her understanding, or let her walk away believing you simply chose money and status over her? I let her walk away, accepting the pain of her misunderstanding as another layer of my sacrifice. The following weeks were a dizzying, hollow blur of accelerated wedding planning. It wasn't a celebration, it was a corporate merger executed with flowers and seating charts. I met Isabelle. She was beautiful, poised, and utterly controlled. She moved with the cool, practiced grace of a woman who knew she was a commodity, a valuable asset in a transaction. Our conversations were limited to logistics. We discussed the guest list, the venue, and the necessary public facade of a happy couple. There was no pretense of romance, no forced flirtation. It was a shared, miserable duty. She carried the weight of her family's expectations, I carried the guilt of my shattered life. I sometimes wondered if she knew the full truth, the scandal, the near ruin of the Vances. Her father, Mr. Thorne, was meticulous. He probably laid out the terms clearly. Isabelle was the key to saving the Vance name, and her reward was a secure, if loveless, position in a major family. The wedding day was a masterpiece of deception. The socialites, the investors, the regulators, everyone was there, watching, judging, assessing the solidity of the new alliance. Isabelle was breathtakingly elegant. I stood beside her, a handsome, smiling fraud. As the ceremony concluded and we were presented to the world, I felt the chilling, hard reality of the gilded cage snapping shut around me. My father, standing nearby, looked 10 years younger, the fear replaced by a steely, grateful pride. His reputation, for now, was safe. The price was paid. The first year of our marriage was a choreography of avoidance. We lived in a magnificent, sprawling house, a wedding gift from the Thornes, that felt vast and cold. Isabelle and I maintained separate wings, separate schedules, and separate lives, intersecting only for the necessary public performances, charity galas, family dinners, and corporate events where the joint presence of Vance Thorne was mandatory. We were exquisitely polite. We never fought. We never truly spoke. Our interaction was a constant, polished lie. I poured myself into the family firm, working 70 hours a week to rebuild what my father had almost destroyed. I used my legal and financial acumen to stabilize the firm, to bury the scandal, and to justify the sacrifice of my life. I was good at it. The sheer necessity of the task became my miserable focus. But at night, the silence of the house was deafening. I would stand in my library, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city lights, feeling the profound, aching loneliness of a man who had everything and possessed nothing of value. I couldn't paint. The passion, the chaotic urge to create, was completely gone, choked by the sterile air of my new reality. I looked at color and felt only gray. I tried to talk to Isabelle once, early on, about my life before. I mentioned my interest in the arts, attempting to find a single, shared human connection beyond the contractual obligations of our marriage. I started watching Isabelle more closely, trying to discern if there was any humanity beneath the polished veneer, any crack in her perfect composure that would explain why she went through with this loveless sham. She was unfailingly courteous, relentlessly disciplined, and shockingly efficient. She ran the household, managed her own philanthropic ventures, and played the part of the perfect Vance wife flawlessly. But I often found her staring out the window, a small, unreadable shadow crossing her face. Was it sadness, regret, boredom? I couldn't tell. If you suspected your partner was as miserable as you were, but neither of you could break the carefully constructed silence, would you risk everything to expose the lie, or keep the peace to protect the fragile stability? I decided to risk it, not through an emotional outburst, but through a calculated act of transparency. I started leaving small things in her path. I left my old, dusty art supplies on my desk, open to show the dried-up tubes of color. I played the symphonies I used to love loudly in my study. I wanted a reaction, any reaction, that proved she saw me as a man, not just a successful surname. The supplies disappeared. The music volume was politely lowered by the smart home system. Isabelle never mentioned any of it. The subtle, chilling message was clear. She was managing the disruption, smoothing over the cracks I was trying to create. Then came the second, shocking reveal. It wasn't about me, it was about her. I was working late one night, reviewing some old Vance family accounts, records dating back to the time of the merger. I was tracing a series of large, undocumented transfers made after the marriage but before the Thornes injected their capital. The numbers were confusing, obscured by shell companies. I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that the massive scandal that necessitated the merger and my sacrifice was actually much smaller than I was led to believe. The financial hole was substantial, yes, but recoverable. The real danger wasn't financial ruin, it was the reputational shame that my father couldn't bear. The marriage wasn't the only solution, it was the easiest and fastest way to secure the Thorne family's political and social shield, avoiding the embarrassment of public damage control. The transfers confirmed it. My father had used a portion of the Thornes' capital, Isabelle's inheritance, to quietly buy back the damaged assets before the public even knew the full extent of the issue. Isabelle's father, Mr. Thorne, had masterfully engineered the deal, not just saving the Vances, but effectively taking a financial stake in their firm through the marriage contract. My father hadn't asked me to sacrifice my life to save his freedom. He had asked me to sacrifice my life to save his ego and his social standing. The crisis was real, but my marriage was the price for the clean, immediate, and painless recovery of the Vance reputation. I was a pawn in a game of dynasty preservation. The anger was cold, paralyzing. I had not sacrificed my future for a noble cause, I had sacrificed it for a public relations strategy. I confronted my father the next day, not with anger, but with the quiet, surgical precision of a lawyer who knows he has all the facts. I laid out the financial documents, the dates, the obscured transfers. My father, Arthur Vance, didn't deny it. He looked at the papers, then looked at me, and his eyes held no shame, only cold justification. He admitted that the financial crisis was manageable, but the loss of status was not. Reputation is everything, Julian, he said, his voice hard. It is the only thing that separates us from the rest. You married Isabelle, and you secured the Vance name for another 50 years. Your life is a small price for that legacy. In that moment, I hated him. I realized the profound emptiness of the name I had spent my life protecting. The Vance legacy was built on pride, lies, and the absolute devaluation of personal happiness. I went home, the realization weighing on me like a physical burden. I had to talk to Isabelle. I walked into her study, interrupting her meeting preparations. She looked up, annoyed by the unexpected intrusion. I didn't speak about the finances. I spoke about the truth. Isabelle, I said quietly, I know you didn't marry me for love. But I need to know one thing. When you walk into this house every day, when you put on the perfect clothes, when you manage this perfect life, do you ever look around and wonder what you sacrificed? She paused, the mask of perfect composure momentarily slipping. A deep, complex sadness flashed in her eyes, a look I had never seen before. She didn't answer the question directly. She simply walked over to her wall of framed, black and white photos, images of her younger self, traveling, smiling freely. She took down a small, elegant frame and turned it over. The back of the frame, which had been hidden from view for years, was a piece of cheap, cracked particle board. This house, she said, her voice low and even, is built on a beautiful, solid foundation. But if you look behind the picture frame, Julian, the veneer is thin and the wood underneath is cheap. We both live in the veneer. It was her way of saying, I know, too. I know the life is a performance. I know the beauty is a facade. I know the sacrifice is real. I realized then that she was not my enemy or my jailer, she was my fellow prisoner. She sacrificed the opportunity to marry for love, to choose her own path, for the sake of the Thorne name and her father's strategic needs. We were both victims of the same ruthless system, two assets exchanged to secure dynasties. The marriage didn't end that day. It didn't end in fire or fury. We looked at each other, two people who saw the painful, ugly truth behind the beautiful lie they were living, and we returned to our separate wings. She listened politely, her face a mask of mild curiosity, then smiled faintly. She mentioned that her mother used to hire artists to paint floral arrangements for their formal rooms. The dismissal was subtle, complete, and crushing. She didn't see my passion. She saw my potential hobby, something decorative that required management. I realized then that she was as much a product of this system as I was. We were two prisoners, separated by different sets of bars. The years passed in a blur of professional success and personal failure. The Vance firm was stronger than ever, thanks to the Thorne capital and my relentless effort. My father's reputation was not only saved but elevated, the past scandal successfully neutralized and forgotten by the society that had once been ready to devour him. But I, Julian, the man, was an emotional ghost. I was known in the city as the brilliantly reliable partner, the epitome of the devoted, successful Vance heir. I was respected, feared, and constantly praised for my commitment. Yet, every time my father introduced me, beaming with pride, the bitter taste of my sacrifice would coat my throat. He didn't thank me for saving him, he thanked me for being Vance. My quiet desperation led me to seek out small forms of rebellion. I started taking long, solitary drives on weekends, escaping the city and the house, driving until the air smelled clean and the landscape was wild. I would pull over and just stand there, trying to remember the man who was ready to trade this security for a single, perfect canvas. On one such trip, 2 years into the marriage, I saw a familiar sight, a small, vibrant art gallery in a town far from the city. I stopped, drawn by an irresistible pull. The gallery was showing a new collection. The style was instantly recognizable, a furious, passionate explosion of form and color that took my breath away. It was bold, heartbreaking, and fiercely real. The artist's name was listed on the plaque, E. Riel. I didn't need to read the full name. It was Elara. I stared at her work, seeing the talent I had encouraged, the fire I had tried to extinguish in myself, blazing across the walls. Her life hadn't stopped, it had exploded into something magnificent. She had not only survived my betrayal, she had used the wreckage to build her dream. I felt a rush of complex emotion, searing regret, agonizing jealousy, and a strange, profound sense of pride. I had lost her, but the artist survived. The knowledge that she was happy, pursuing her truth, made my own gilded cage feel even tighter, heavier. I never contacted her. I couldn't. What would I say? I'm sorry I destroyed your heart and my life for my father's reputation, which I successfully saved. I walked out of the gallery, leaving that piece of my past untouched, and drove back to the cold politeness of my marriage. The next year was the hardest. The silent resentment began to fester. The truth had not freed us, it had simply made the cage transparent. We still appear together, the perfect Vance Thorne couple, at every mandatory event. My father rests easy, his reputation intact. I continue to run the firm, my professional life a triumph. I have everything the world values: success, status, stability. But I am still the artist who lives in a world of gray. I drive past Elara's gallery sometimes, seeing the vibrant colors that are not mine. I have saved my parents from social ruin, but I have destroyed the one person I was always meant to be. I am Julian Vance, the perfect heir, living a life of perfect misery. The happiness I lost was the only thing that made me real. What do you think? Was my sacrifice a necessary evil to protect the generations of Vances, or was it a fatal error of misplaced loyalty that cost me my soul? Knowing the truth now, that my father lied about the depth of the crisis, does that change whether my choice was right or wrong? Let me know your opinion in the comments below. If this story of reputation, sacrifice, and the search for happiness resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to follow my journey as I try to find a way out of this gilded cage.